This video is brought to you by this queen. More on that later. Welcome loons, goons, and anyone ready to swoon. I'm Sarah and I have become obsessed with Heated Rivalry. I cannot stop talking about it. I'm making this series so I don't have to just talk about it to myself. We're overanalyzing the characters, what they're about, what they're doing, how the story works, sprinkling in some symbols that we see, how things are framed, and other good micro expressions that everyone can't stop talking about. Let's jump straight into it. We don't have time for a long intro. We need the heat. This video contains spoilers for Heated Rivalry Season 1. Last time we talked about the introduction scene, the very first scene where we see the main characters, Shane and Ilya. They have this little conversation and we sort of get introduced to what type of characters they are. So go to that video to check out the conversation on that. It's in a bit more of like a private setting, but now we're jumping into how the commentator is introducing them, which is a bit more like high speed, high paced, performative a bit, and sort of how they're seen from the outside view, from the sports world. As very much as the Rosenolf and Hollander introductions. They're already sort of getting like pitted against each other a little bit. We hear that they're both like some of the highest prospects in the world right now to go into hockey like professionally. We get their little introductions from the commentators and some facts about them as we see a montage of them doing some practicing, and we're getting a bit more insight to this as well. It's going like back and forth. So I'm gonna try and like keep to Shane first and then Ilya to keep it like a little more organized hopefully. Firstly, we hear about Shane. He's Ottawa's own, so we know he's Canadian and he's from Ottawa. We hear he's not very sociable, at least from like what the commenters have heard. I wonder if this is like really true. We just saw Shane walk up to Ilia very actively, wanting to really engage and have conversation. So of course that sort of takes away that he's not very sociable. And I think it just is that Shane is not like very extroverted, he's more introverted, he needs more time for himself. He maybe only really engages with people when he really wants to, but that doesn't mean that, you know, he's not sociable, that he doesn't want social interactions and doesn't enjoy being around people and friends and having a good time with other people. It maybe just means that he's a little more selective how he like spends his energy. But it's like an interesting like characteristic, and one like, as we know, Shane is like autistic. I know for myself, like being very introverted and having a hard time like talking with people in like big groups, of sort of being labeled as like, oh, the quiet one. And of course, like, isn't like compare myself to someone with autism. Like I can't speak on that obviously, but I can like understand like this sort of like being put in like a label because you're not really like conforming to this like idea of how you should behave. Maybe someone can like sound off in the comments, like if you are autistic, is this something that you have experience with? It also shows how in the hockey world that he's perceived as this more quiet, introspected, serious player. We hear Shane is incredibly dedicated to the game, and also later on in the show we hear him talk about how because the game got more intense as he got older and had to go on more professional levels, that he also needed to become more intense about it himself. And I think maybe this line also highlights that a little bit of how he is quite intense about how he approaches hockey and his whole regimen about it, also with like his dietary restrictions and things like this. We hear this intelligence is highlighted. He's both incredibly smart and he has a high hockey IQ. I heard people talk about this in the sense that it could be like a microaggression because he is Asian Canadian, and there is this like stigma, stereotype, what you would call it, around Asians and how they are very intelligent. I'm not Asian or a minority, so of course I can't talk about like microaggressions in the sense of like lived experience, but I think it's important to be aware of this and that minorities like face these microaggressions all over their daily lives, in their workplaces and so on. We also see this like at the draft scene when Shane and his parents is talking with the manager. Again, I can't speak on it from like experience or anything, so please like if you have some thoughts on it, let me know, and please like check out the creators that are like talking more about this in depth and have like more knowledge on it. The line also shows how he is perceived as a player within the league. He knows the game very well and he's a very technically calculated player. This is the skills that is played up here. We hear he is fast and he has also a good shot. Throughout the montage, we mostly see him just like playing the game. There's not really too much else going on of him, you know, chatting with his teammates or his coach. So maybe there is something about him not being very social after all. Obviously, they're all like huddled around and seeing like the coach do some strategic things, but otherwise we just see him skate around doing a great shot as they're then commentating on as well. And we see Shane's eyes sort of like flicker up when he notices Ilya up in the stands, which is a bit of a contrast to how Ilya notices Shane later on. It's a bit more like calculated, like calm. When Shane is noticing Ilya up in the stands, you see like a zoom in up to Ilya to really like get him into the focus. Ilya's demeanor here is like really interesting. Like he is really sat in the seat. He doesn't care who's gonna see. He planted it as there to make Shane know that he is there watching him, man-spreading and everything. This is perhaps also Ilya's way of returning the favor. Shane said, "You're an awesome player to watch, so here is Ilya giving it back." He has this really intimidating vibe to him, and he's like chewing on his dog string or what it's called from the sweatshirt, and basically it's just looking down like, yeah, I'm gonna cheer you out, dude. We also see that Ilya is like sitting here alone, which is like a contrast to when we see Shane a bit when he's sitting there with his mom. And I kind of feel like it shows how Ilya also, I mean, he sort of is alone, but he also feels alone. A little cute symbol nugget put in here is that he's sitting above the 108 seat number, which is supposed to be some sort of like love number. So that is like incredibly cute. They're both like sitting around this number. So sort of like, you know, like love is like right there, right around the corner. Like could just grab it if you wanted to, you know. When we get Ilya's introduction, we hear he is from Russia. He is strong on the puck and a strong skater. So here we have like the physical highlighted. Ilya's physical presence, his demeanor, his physicality in general is what is highlighted as his skill here. We hear that he likes to get under other players' skin. So we get this, oh, he's like into sort of mind games. He likes to antagonize people. And we also see him antagonizing his peers and that he's really having fun with it. Like he kind of likes to get a rise out of people. The commentators are talking about how he is disliked in the opponent's locker room, but liked in his own. And I'm sort of wondering if that is really true. And because this statement comes like right after we see him like antagonizing the other players on his team. So I wonder if maybe he's not always so liked in his own team either. Or maybe that's just part of like the game and the fun that you sort of are like shit talking each other, even in like within your own team. Of course, chirping is also a way for Ilya to show affection, but this goalie really looks like he's about to throw hands. Potentially also it just shows that he is like also a very charming guy. So like even if he is shit talking, people still like him on his own team. Also because we see Ilya later on in his career have great relationships and interactions with his teammates in Boston. Potentially this also shows that he has some growing to do in terms of where he is at this point and when we see him later on the Boston team. We also hear that he is Boston's pick, saying that there is some interest in him for when he goes pro, like what team would like him. We don't hear anything about that in like Shane's little intro, and it's kind of interesting with like the difference in how they're like perceived, I guess, and also sort of like the outward interest that there is. It also makes me wonder if Shane is really that surprised when Boston picks Ilya later on at the draft. When we see the little photo montage with the commentator's intro, we see him also like huddle around like the coach doing some strategy things, and then we see him, as I said, like antagonizing his peers. And we also see when Ilya is like looking up into the stands where Shane is sitting with his mom, that he gets reprimanded by his coach. And this is like a really important thing to have included because it shows both how Ilya responds like to peers versus authority figures, here in the form of his coach. With his peers, he's very outgoing. He's like in their face. He's playing around. He's playing games. But with authority figures, he gets way more docile, closed off. He doesn't push back or say anything. He just closes down a little bit. It also shows the difference in Shane and Ilya's immediate environment. Like Shane is doing the exact same thing. He's looking up in the stands where Ilya is sitting, but he doesn't get reprimanded. So it shows like a very difference, very much a contrast in their environments, and how critical Ilya's environment is compared to Shane's. When we see Shane looking down on Ilya, he is not alone, as in contrast to Ilya. He's sitting there with his mom, who also is really sad there. Like, she looks like a queen, like I said earlier. A lioness looking over her kingdom. She also has this like smoldering eye thing going on. Like, she's not happy with these Russian people. And I kind of find it funny to sort of think about how what Shane would have said to like, oh mom, I want to go look at Ilya. And I wonder if it would have been Yuna's like idea. Like, maybe she saw Ilya as well and was like, oh, this Russian boy is looking at you. Who does he think he is? We're gonna look at him. I don't know, what do you think how that conversation went? Something I also find very interesting is how Ilya versus Shane is sitting on these seats. Like I said, Ilya is like really parked down, like he's sitting there, he doesn't care who sees, where Shane is like perching on the seat. Like, he is ready to get out there whenever he can. And it also puts in this little symbolism, or what you call it, of the difference in the dynamics. Like, Ilya is like sitting there as a predator, like scoping down his prey, and Shane is more sitting as the prey, like ready to get away quick if he needs to. It's also shown in how they look up at each other watching, and this sort of dynamic is like shown throughout the show as well. And I find it like interesting, like how they like sprinkled this in here. You also start to see a bit of how the dynamic work with Ilya acting and Shane reacting. Here with Ilya firstly looking down on Shane, and then afterwards Shane following suit. Something interesting about these shots, like into the stands, is also the indication of how they're not only looking at each other in this moment, but also throughout their careers, they're gonna have people watching their every move. And these shots are building in the concept that they aren't free to just do what they want to do. Throughout the montage and their introduction from the POV of the sports world, they are literally right in the spotlight. Nowhere to hide or be private. We're jumping 1 week ahead in time, still December 2008. It is the final of the Prospects Cup, Canada versus Russia, and Canada has lost. And they're showing this in a really like cool and beautiful way. Like, we only see just like a few seconds. Like, you hear the horn of like the game has ended, and then you see like a few seconds slow-mo of the Russian team celebrating on the ice, and you see Shane sort of like panning, skating through the scene. And I just love how they did this, like so simple and so short, but you really get the feelings of the scene. The ecstasy of the Russian team, so excited, happy, celebrating on the ice, and like the devastation and sadness, and probably also like self-critique that you see from Shane as he's like skating through. And that's like basically all that we need just to know like what has happened. And with how fast-paced the show is, like we can't really spend too much time on these moments that don't have such a big impact like on the story, and like we need to move on and get to the juicy bits, right? So I think it's really fun how they like came over this challenge of needing to have a very quick little beat. I also just really love how you see Shane like skating through the scene. It gives like a really cool energy to it, and you really go from like focusing on sort of like the results of the game and like into like the character and sort of their mind and what they're thinking. And then it also is a really cool how they contrasted these two characters up against each other, with Shane is here skating like from right to left, and when we later on see Ilia losing with the Russians, he is skating from left to right and sort of like doing the opposite. Almost they can be skating into each other. And this framing we sort of see throughout the show when we have like the close-ups of them. They're like framed in a way that makes it a lot of the times looks like they're actually having the conversation. Like you can see back and forth, they're sort of like similarly framed in the frame, like how they're positioned. And also like when we have the text conversations and stuff, it almost is still like they could be standing in front of each other and talking. We're also getting some commentary from the commentators, so we get a bit more of like an idea of what has been going on, and also like some more setup for the story of this rivalry, I suppose. The commentators are talking about how Canada has lost. They're like a younger team. They haven't played together so long, and they couldn't get past like the Russian defense, like the elite Russian defense or something like this, they say. These lines are also very sports-like to me. The commentators finding ways of explaining what has happened on the field in these very like colorful ways. And we also hear that Ilia kept getting past the Canadian defense. And I'm wondering if this is like in multiple ways, like both physically, he could get past him and also like mentally get past him, right? Like as we heard earlier, he really likes the mind games and he really likes to get in the head and sort of fuck a little around to see how he can find weak points and get around his opponents. This line, getting past the defense, also is giving some symbolic meaning of how Ilya will be getting past Shane's defenses, like in a more sexual, romantic way. Obviously, that's not what the commentators are talking about, but more so for us, the audience watching it. Another great symbolism line is how the Canadian team are still finding their identity, just like Shane is throughout the show. And the commentators are mentioning also specifically Shane couldn't get past like the Russian. And so we're really talking about like the individuals like versus the teams and the individuals like versus each other, which is very interesting because it's like a team sport. So it's like you would think it's like the team against each other, obviously, but even the commentators here is like very putting it up against like Shane against Ilya, like the individuals against each other, and sort of putting this thought of the rivalry and the competition between the two into like the head of us, and I guess like also like in the world, like the people that would be watching. I love this overhead shot that we get, like when they're shaking hands. It just looks so cool, like the symmetry and this like sliding, gliding, like opposite ways. It just looks so cool. Shane is obviously kind of down about the loss. Like obviously he would want to win. Ilya is obviously like more excited and happy to have won, but also he doesn't want to like lose this whatever connection, interaction that he's had with Shane. And maybe also he still want to get in his head a little bit. Perhaps at this point in time, this is Ilya's only way of really like connecting, communicating, is to like stir shit up a little. And he throws out this line when they are shaking hands, "See you at the draft," which I think Shane is maybe more taking maybe as like a little antagonizing. At least that's like how I was reading it at first. It's like sort of being like, oh, like I will have a good time at the draft because I won now, and me, you probably won't have such a good time because you lost. Like you're not as good, you're not as like as favorable a pick anymore. It's like, it's very like mind games, but it also is saying like, oh, we will be seeing each other again, and maybe also I look forward to see you again, and like maybe also like talk with him more. Like if you didn't want to see him at the draft, like you could just ignore him, right? But he's like purposely saying to Shane of like, oh, we're gonna see each other again. Maybe also trying to keep it like a bit more playful, and like how he sort of ended the interaction out in their first introduction to each other, more playful and not so like closed off. And you can also see when Ilya has like said this line and they have to like move on to shake the next person's hands, you can see he has this like little smile before the camera cuts over to Shane, who looks a bit more shaken up and unsure like how he should take this. It looks like he already is starting to overthink everything. And so we're getting more and more insights into the character, how they are responding to the world and how the world responds to them and also perceive them. And you really get to see this sort of like push and pull dynamic that they have and will like continue to develop through like this season, and how the heated rivalry will be like perceived. This is another fun introduction of the characters, I feel like, but from like a different type of view. And I think it's very fun to have like the two types of introduction, like the more private one and the more like outward from the outside look at it, like up against each other. And it really also shows the differences and the similarities in how they are and how they're like perceived, like at least at this moment in time, how they are and how they're perceived. So these are the scenes to look on this time. Next time we're gonna move on to like the draft and the family event, and there's like so many things that I want to say about this. I'm looking forward to talking more about this with you guys. Please let me know what your thoughts was on what I was saying here. Do you agree? Was it weird? Did it make you think of something new? Let's continue the conversation in like the comments. I love to like just talk about the show and talk about it with other people. Like it's just so much fun to hear what other people are interpreting and how they're seeing things. Hopefully I will have the next video up for you guys in a few days. Until then, remember that you are always in season. Seasons of sorrow, seasons of sorrow.